Hi, I'm Tony Saldana. Welcome to our video series on professional GBS. In this session, which is our second clip on service management, we will cover creating service catalogs and service charters. Now, within service management, congratulations, because now you have defined what the brand building framework is that you're going to apply to define your service. So as you go forward, in this particular clip, we will share with you how you can create very strong devotion amongst your customers by using something called the service management framework. The service management framework is how you go from a very strong brand building framework equity onto something really tangible, like a catalog of services, as well as deliberate charters for each of the offerings within your service. And as always, as a reminder, we recommend that you go through these 4 sessions within service management in sequence. Also, please cover the Foundations module before attempting any other module. So now let's build on the ideal state of the brand building framework that defines what you want to be. And let's talk about an important question. How do you charter your GBS services to inspire that absolute customer devotion? So how might you organize your work as well as structure your team so that you're able to create charters to deliver against this customer devotion? What would it take, in other words, for your users to say, hey, I love my GBS accountant, or I love my GBS payroll services? There is a methodology to do that. There is a single best approach in each of these cases. And that single best approach uses and continues to use the analogy of running as a business. In this particular case, your brand building framework has given you an ideal state, but it's a state which exists on paper. It's a little bit like you're going to start up a business. Let's say you want to start up a cola business. And what you're trying to do here is you're trying to create your product catalog. What are the different products? Where am I going to sell them? Who's going to manufacture them? How am I going to track my financial progress? The analogy can be applied to GBS. If you're talking about financial shared services, what are my different products and services under financial shared services? Of course, you got your record to report. You got, other elements of accounts receivables, accounts payables, and many other services that might fall within that catalog of services. Once you define that product catalog, then you're going to have to go ahead and implement the aspects of how you bring this to life. And that's really what we're going to get into in more detail as part of something called the service management framework. Now, you might recall from the previous video clip on service management, the brand building framework. I'm going to recap that very briefly. It basically is an ideal state design which incorporates assessing the total landscape within which you're going to operate. It defines the who. Who are the people that you're trying to serve? It defines the what. What is your product? And it defines the how, which is how you're going to market, or implement these capabilities. Now, let's take an example such as payroll. Who is your competition for your payroll? Now, you may say, well, nobody really, because we're the only people that do payroll in the organization. But that's not really true. There may be other companies that do payroll better than you do, including, dedicated payroll providers. And so that's assessing the landscape. Who are my users? Well, everybody. But even within that, there are different types of users, maybe different countries, maybe, management versus admin, and so on and so forth. And how are you going to bring this to life? Direct deposit, payment slips, so on and so forth. Once you have that, what you have is an ideal state design. Now you're ready to implement the rest of the service management framework. The service management framework is the execution of the brand building framework. At the end of the brand building framework, what you should have had is an ideal state of design, everything else being the same in an ideal world. This is the requirements that your users and customers are saying that they want. Now, all you have to do is to translate them into physical products and services to create a service strategy and an ongoing methodology for actually operating some of this. That comes out of the brand building framework. It is based on Procter & Gamble's original brand management methodology, except that it has been applied to service management. So the question for you is, how does this actually happen? Do you do this on an annual basis for every service, say payroll as a service? What do you do? Do you do strategies? Do you do charters? Do you do some kind of checklist for operations? That's essentially what we're going to get into next. The way you bring your service management framework to life is by starting with an ideal state design. Now, we mentioned it briefly earlier under the brand building framework. That gives you the parameters of what your users want you to do and under what conditions. Now, of course, that's ideal state. You're going to have to marry that with the current state. It's possible that you already have some services. You may have some challenges. You may have, a whole complex rat's nest of different services all under payroll, and you're trying to figure out what to do with it, right? So you're going to have to marry the ideal state with current reality. So that's the first step. The next step is to marry both of them with direction that you may be getting from the company or from your GBS leader. Maybe there is a corporate strategy that says, hey, we have to cut costs by 50%, or we have to create additional value, innovate on new services. This is all input that comes from the top, from the company or the GBS strategy. Once you do that, you are in a position to take all of that input and create your own service strategy. Let's say you belong to the human resources shared services and you manage within that the payroll strategy. You're going to have to take into account what ideally users want out of you, what clients want out of you, and what's happening in the external environment. You're going to have to marry that, map that with the current reality, as well as the top-down input. Coming out of that is not just a service strategy, but then an execution roadmap. This is how you're going to create value for your company. This is how GBS payroll is going to add additional value to your company. So this is the steps that you follow in order to get to your service execution. Now, within that, in the ideal state, there are a few elements themselves that you're going to have to follow first. First, within the broad service area, let's say HR, human resources services, you're going to have to define the catalog of different capabilities or services that are required. So, for example, within human resource services, payroll is just one of those capabilities. And you're going to have to list a catalog that lists not just payroll, but maybe, hire to retire or, training management as different services under HR services. Each of those services then needs to be translated into its own charter, and then from there, scorecard, and then from there, obviously, roadmap of capabilities as you develop them over a period of time. Now, let's take the first of those steps, which is creating a GBS product or GBS service catalog. And this is where the analogy with physical product companies works beautifully. So let's take Procter & Gamble as an example. You've got a business unit, and the business unit probably could be something like a a fabric and home care, or it could be any of the other business units like beauty or healthcare. But for this illustration, let's assume that it is the fabric and home care. The equivalent within this could be a GBS service, right? Perhaps it is the manufacturing and plant-related GBS shared services. So as you can tell, under this broad category, you've got subcategories of products or services. So in the case of Procter & Gamble, maybe under the fabric and home care, you've got laundry, right? Under GBS, similarly, you might have other services, such as maybe, plant services. Of course, within the product world, you go deeper and deeper. The category of laundry could go into a product of Tide, and then under that, the SKU may be a certain product size or a product type, which is, powders or Tide pods. And under that, eventually, you have a platform, right? It may be a surfactant or a cleaning agent that is common to all of your products. And similarly, in the GBS product catalog, you could drill down into plant, under plant services, you might have facilities management, or under that, you may have other products as well, and technology foundations. So this analogy works really, really beautifully, because what it does is it focuses you to say, what unmet user and business needs are you trying to meet? And how might you organize your services? The challenge that many GBS organizations might have is that in their current stage, they have been given a mishmash of different products and services that have been acquired from either different businesses or from different functions. So in the example I was giving earlier, it's possible that you end up with 5 or 6 different types of payroll solutions because they all come from acquired businesses, and each of them had their own ways to do payroll. But by using the GBS catalog, you can tell that really you're talking about one solution, even if you happen to have 5 different variants of that today. And it allows you to standardize and scale and build upon that so you have a coherent payroll solution going forward. This is what you do to define the catalog. Obviously, as you do this, you're going to have to address the fact that this is not going to be static. Over a period of time, the needs of the business might change. You may decide that you want to innovate, you want to add new capabilities. Maybe in the HR services, you want to be in the business of doing not just standard classroom training, but certification that comes from online courses. And that's a different solution or a service that you want to add under the product catalog. Well, you know where to fit that into the product catalog, and you can coherently build out the set of solutions that is required for human resources services to be successful within your organization. This is the ultimate value of the product catalog. What it does is it looks at your business and your customer needs holistically, and it creates a portfolio of offerings that you can change every year or, from time to time as is necessary to meet the needs of your business and your users. So now that you've defined your service catalog, what you're going to have to do is create a service charter. This is something that's specific to one service. So I'm going to contrast that with the brand building framework that might have seemed similar. The brand building framework had the what, the who, and the how, and it defined the ideal state of the broader GBS organization or of the broader category of services, for example, HR-related services. Now that you've gone from HR-related services, as an example, into something more narrow, which is payroll as a unique service within HR, you're going to have to deliver the service charter, which is the definition of your payroll services under the broader category. The approach, though, of the brand building framework still holds good. You've got to define the what. Now, in this case, the what is very, very simple. It is, what is your service definition? So if we're talking about payroll, it is to help deliver you know, compensation and benefits to all of the employees on either a weekly or a monthly basis. I mean, you know, it's as simple as that. That's your service definition. What's your service objectives? Again, part of the what. It is, the objective is to make sure that, you know, employees get paid accurately, timely, they never have any issues, proactively, the experience is delightful, which is essentially what is also part of the value proposition. That, you know, the value proposition for payroll in this particular case is reliability, is experience, it is, you know, essentially making sure that your employees are monetarily correctly compensated. All of that falls under the category of what for your specific service. In this example, we talked about the payroll service. The next one is the who. Now, conceptually, we've talked about the who, which is the users as well as the clients. You're going to have to get down to name level detail because now you're in the midst of creating a specific payroll or specific any other service charter. So it's really, you know, you don't have to name all of the users, but for the user community, you're going to have to identify who are the people, you know, where are they, what levels, so that you can serve them correctly. In the case of payroll, obviously, you're going to have to pay them correctly. But those are only part of your customer definitions. Remember, earlier on, we also talked about your clients, your senior executives also being stakeholders. And that's a smaller group that defines how much service they want to consume, as well as your global process owners that set the standards for your service. So defining those names in granular detail is the next step of the service charter. And of course, the final step of the service charter is the how. And the how in this particular case for a given service is to identify, you know, the service level agreements. You know, how do you measure success? How do you know that something's working or not? What is the cost? What are the strategic choices? Do you want one payroll solution or multiple payroll solutions? All of this needs to be defined as part of the how. Putting that together, the who, the what, and the how, in the context of a specific service is the documented service charter. So in this clip, we've shared a little bit of information on how you take the brand building framework to define your ideal state. You take it from there and you use the service management framework to bring it to life. And the goal is to create devotion, absolute loyalty among your internal users and your clients of your GBS service. Of course, the service management framework starts with the brand building framework, and within the brand building framework, the ideal state definition needs to include the creation of a service catalog. And this is the hierarchy of all of the service categories, the services, and the solutions, and how they all come together to meet the needs of your users. Once you create the service catalog, you get into the service charter, which is really a detailed definition for each of those services. You're defining what is it that I'm going to deliver. You're defining who is my target audience, and then you're defining how, which is the strategic choices of how you're going to implement some of these services. So in this second clip of the service management module, we've shared with you the beginnings of the methodology that's going to result in delightful services for your users and your clients. We hope you've enjoyed this session in our Professional GBS series. And as always, all the best as you professionalize, modernize, and transform.